"Don't hurt him, I'll buy him," she said. "Call him Savage all you want. I see a man worth saving." The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and every story, every mistake, and every secret traveled faster than the wind. People often said small towns had charm, but in this town, charm came with fear. And that fear had a name. That name was Savage. Nobody called him by his real name anymore. Nobody dared. Everyone had a story about him, and none of those stories were kind. Children crossed the street when he passed by. Shopkeepers kept their doors locked just a little longer when they knew he was around. Even the police, men who had seen a lot in their time, gave him space. His reputation was bigger than him, or so the townspeople believed. The first time someone had called him Savage publicly, it was meant as a joke. He was young then, just a little older than a teenager, and he had a temper that flared easily. But over time, what had been a playful nickname became a label, a warning, a shield for the town to justify their fear. They said it with pride, almost like they were protecting themselves from the darkness they imagined he carried. And he didn't correct them. Maybe because correcting people required trust, and he had learned long ago that trust could vanish in a single day. Daniel, as his real name was, had not always been this way. He had grown up with hopes, dreams, and laughter that could fill a room. People remembered seeing him as a boy who loved to play outside, who ran through fields barefoot and climbed trees higher than most dared. He had family who loved him dearly and a smile that could light up even the gloomiest days. But life had a way of changing people. It wasn't one thing, but many small disappointments, harsh words, unfair blame, and a tragedy that stole the life of someone he loved. The world had turned against him, and in response, he had turned inward. The boy who once ran freely through fields became a man who walked carefully through the streets, his gaze fixed ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might judge him. People said they feared him for his size, for his voice that could command attention without raising it, and for the scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. He had a tall, solid frame, broad shoulders that made it clear he could protect himself or strike if needed. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, and his beard, thick and untamed, framed a face that seemed permanently serious. Those eyes, though, were what unsettled people the most. They were not angry or cruel, as many assumed. They were tired, heavy with memories, and haunted by years of isolation. But no one saw that. They only saw the shadow of fear they projected onto him. He worked jobs that were demanding, dangerous even, but he never complained. It was easier to labor in silence than to explain his story to a town that had already decided who he was. And in those moments, while lifting heavy tools, repairing broken machines, or hauling supplies, he found a strange comfort. The work didn't judge him. It didn't whisper rumors. It simply required effort, and that was something he understood. The town itself was a mixture of narrow streets, old brick buildings, and a few small parks where families gathered on weekends. Despite its size, there was always gossip. A new arrival could be known by everyone by the end of the day. Daniel, however, existed as a kind of legend. Stories of his temper, his strength, and his unpredictability were exaggerated with each retelling. Some people claimed he could fight anyone and win. Others said he had a streak of cruelty, though no one could offer proof. And still everyone respected or at least feared his presence. Children were taught at an early age to stay away. "Don't talk to him," parents said. "Call him Savage and keep moving." Adults echoed the same warnings, adding layers of caution and superstition. The more they spoke, the more his myth grew. It was as if the name itself had power, and everyone who used it felt safer, as though by acknowledging the danger they could avoid it. The irony was that Daniel had never once intentionally hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. He wasn't violent by choice. He had learned the hard way that the world expected him to be. Then came the day when the whispers turned to a roar. A small argument erupted in the marketplace, nothing extraordinary on its own, but when Daniel's path crossed with the argument, the situation escalated. A man accused him of something minor, something that could have been resolved with a simple explanation, but no one was willing to give him that chance. "Savage!" someone yelled. The name ricocheted through the crowd, gaining volume, feeding the fear that had been simmering for years. More voices joined in, and suddenly a crowd had formed, all staring, all pointing, all ready to judge before knowing the truth. Daniel stood there silent, his hands at his sides, feeling the familiar tension building in his chest. His first instinct was to turn and leave, to disappear into the shadows of the town and let the storm pass. But this time, something felt different. The crowd was bigger, more insistent, more aggressive. One man shoved him slightly, testing his reaction. Another shouted for him to leave. Children, curious and wide-eyed, watched from a distance. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and anticipation. For a moment, Daniel thought this would be just another day of being misunderstood. Another day of being called a name he had learned to wear like armor. And then, amidst the shouts, came a voice unlike any he had heard in years. Clear, calm, and unwavering. "Don't hurt him," it said. The words cut through the noise like a sharp knife, stopping people mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes searched, and all for a moment the world paused. Daniel's heart skipped. He looked toward the voice and saw her. A woman who had arrived in town only a few weeks earlier, someone who did not flinch, who did not gossip, who did not fear him. She had a presence that demanded attention without demanding submission. She stepped forward, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time in a long time he felt seen. "I'll buy him," she continued, her voice firm, her hands steady. The crowd blinked. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Buy him? What did she mean? Some people laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Others frowned, sensing the seriousness behind her words. "Call him savage all you want," she said. "I see a man worth saving." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. He had heard names, labels, and insults, but never this. Never someone speaking with belief rather than fear. The crowd's energy shifted. People hesitated, unsure of what to do. The man who had shoved Daniel now looked uncertain. Children stopped whispering. Even the elders who had long written Daniel off as dangerous felt a flicker of doubt. The woman's courage had created a pause, a crack in the wall that years of rumor had built around him. Daniel's own body, which had tensed for confrontation, relaxed slightly. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had chosen to see him as he truly was, not as the town had labeled him. He didn't speak. Words had always been difficult, especially when people expected the worst. But he nodded slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement that the woman had noticed him. That someone, after so many years of being called savage, had looked at him and seen Daniel. The crowd, uncertain and silent, slowly began to disperse. The tension lingered, but the immediate threat of judgment had passed, thanks to her courage. That day marked the beginning of something new, though neither Daniel nor the woman could fully understand it yet. The town continued its routine. Children still ran and laughed, and gossip continued to spread. But in the heart of the man called Savage, a seed of change had been planted. For the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe someone believed he could be more than the sum of his past mistakes and the fears of others. The world had labeled him, isolated him, and made him a cautionary tale, but one voice had cut through the noise. One voice had reminded him that he was still human, still capable of being seen, still worth saving. The moment she shouted those words, "Don't hurt him." "I'll buy him," everything in the town seemed to pause. People froze, unsure how to respond. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Others stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Who was this woman who dared to stand up for a man that everyone feared? And what did she mean by "buy him"? It was unusual, almost impossible to understand, and yet something about the way she said it made people stop. The usual whispers, the usual fear, the usual judgment, they all vanished into silence. Daniel, the man everyone called savage, was stunned. He had grown so used to anger, fear, and suspicion that he didn't know how to respond when someone offered protection instead. His heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from surprise. He looked at the woman, standing firmly in the middle of the crowd, her eyes steady and determined. She was not afraid. She did not flinch. She did not whisper behind him or make jokes about his reputation. She simply looked at him as though she saw him, really saw him, for the first time in years. The woman's name was Eliza. She had moved to the town only a few weeks earlier. She was educated, confident, and kind, with a gentle strength that drew people in. Unlike most people in the town, she did not let gossip or rumors shape her opinion. She judged people by what she saw, not what she heard. That's why when she saw Daniel surrounded by anger, she did not see a monster. She saw a man who had been hurt, misunderstood, and abandoned by the world around him. The crowd around them started murmuring. A few men stepped forward, frowning, questioning her boldness. "Are you serious?" one said. "Do you know what kind of man he is?" Another added. "Call him savage all you want, but he'll never change. You can't protect him." Eliza turned to face them calmly, her voice steady and filled with certainty. "Call him whatever you want," she said. "I don't care what you call him. I see a man worth saving. That is all that matters." Her words were unusual in a place where everyone had learned to fear Daniel, where his name had become a warning. People were shocked. They had never heard anyone speak to him with such respect, and even less with such courage. The bravest men in the crowd had never dared step forward to defend him, but this stranger had done it without hesitation. Daniel watched silently, his body tense, unsure of what to do. He had lived years expecting hostility, cruelty, and rejection. This was something entirely different. He felt confused, a little nervous, and maybe even a flicker of hope. Could it be possible that someone believed he could change? That someone saw past the label the town had given him. For a long moment no one spoke. The air was thick with tension. Then slowly the crowd began to disperse. Some muttered to themselves, others exchanged uncertain glances. Children returned to playing in the streets, though some kept peeking at the scene. The men who had stepped forward muttered warnings to Eliza, telling her she was making a mistake, but she did not waver. Her eyes stayed on Daniel. She knew he could feel her belief, even if he could not yet speak it aloud. After the crowd left, she approached him. Her movements were slow and careful, showing that she meant no harm. Daniel instinctively took a step back, unsure what to expect. Most people who came near him carried suspicion, judgment, or aggression. Eliza carried none of those things. She simply extended a hand, not in a gesture of pity, but of friendship, a quiet offering of trust. "Daniel," she said softly, "my name is Eliza. I don't know your story yet, but I want to. Will you let me?" The sound of his real name startled him. People hadn't called him Daniel in years. Everyone knew him as Savage, and the town's memory of him as a dangerous man overshadowed who he really was. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, searching for hidden motives. There were none. He saw only sincerity, patience, and courage. Finally, he nodded, a small but meaningful gesture. That single nod was the first sign of trust he had shown anyone in years. Over the next few days, Eliza made it her mission to understand Daniel. She didn't ask questions that pried too deep too fast. She didn't judge him for the nickname that had followed him everywhere. Instead, she observed him, watched his movements, listened to his silence, and slowly learned about the man behind the label. She discovered that Daniel had a gentle side, the part of him that once laughed freely, cared deeply, and wanted to belong. She learned that Daniel's anger, which some people called dangerous, was born from years of misunderstanding and loss. He had been blamed for things he did not do. People had left him when he needed them most. The nickname, Savage, had started as a joke, then became a symbol of the town's fear, and eventually became a shield that Daniel used to protect himself from further pain. Eliza's belief in him was like sunlight on frozen ground. Daniel felt warmth and life that he hadn't experienced in a long time. He began to respond in small ways. At first, it was just a nod or a quiet word. Then he started speaking more, though cautiously. He shared small pieces of his past, and Eliza listened without judgment. Her presence became a safe space where he could breathe, think, and even hope. The town noticed the change. Some were skeptical. Some laughed quietly, thinking it was temporary. "She can't change him," they whispered. "No one can." Others watched in silence, unable to believe that a man known as Savage could ever be anything else. But slowly, small transformations began to show. Daniel stopped avoiding the marketplace. He started working more openly, not hiding in the shadows. He began helping others, not because he wanted praise, but because he realized kindness was possible when someone believed in you. Eliza encouraged him to take small steps. She didn't push him too fast. She knew that trust had to be earned and change had to be nurtured. Together, they worked on small tasks around the town. She helped him fix broken fences, assist neighbors, and slowly integrate himself into the community again. With each small success, Daniel's confidence grew, and with each act of trust, the town began to question their own assumptions. People started noticing the difference. The children who once ran away now waved at him. Shopkeepers greeted him with cautious smiles. The local baker, who had avoided him for years, even offered him a loaf of bread, simply because he saw the changes. Daniel did not seek attention or approval. He only learned to trust, guided by someone who believed he could be more than the label the town had placed upon him. The turning point came when someone new arrived in town, a person who had heard stories of Savage and wanted to test him. A small confrontation occurred, minor yet enough to trigger the old fears. People expected Daniel to react with anger to prove that he was the dangerous man they had always believed him to be. But Daniel surprised them. He remained calm, careful, and controlled. He did not lash out. He did not shout. He did not give anyone a reason to call him savage. Eliza watched with quiet pride. She knew this was more than a single victory. It was a sign that the man she believed in was beginning to believe in himself. For Daniel, the presence of Eliza had opened a door he had thought was forever closed. He realized that someone had seen him as a person, not a problem. Someone had refused to fear him, refused to judge him, and refused to let the town's assumptions dictate who he could be. That realization was powerful. It gave him hope. It gave him courage. And most importantly, it gave him a reason to try again. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Daniel continued to work steadily, communicate cautiously, and build trust slowly. Each positive interaction reinforced the lessons Eliza had taught him. That kindness is stronger than fear, that trust can heal wounds, and that belief can change a person more than punishment ever could. By the end of the weeks, Daniel was no longer just the man people feared. He had started to reclaim his identity, not as Savage, but as Daniel. People began to notice the transformation, and even those who doubted him began to respect the change. The journey was far from over, but a crucial step had been taken. Eliza's courage and belief in Daniel proved that sometimes, all it takes is one person to see the good in someone to help them find it themselves. And for Daniel, the world felt different for the first time in years. It no longer felt entirely against him. There was a chance, a possibility of acceptance, and a spark of hope that could grow into something more. Eliza had been watching Daniel carefully for weeks. She had seen the small changes, the gestures of trust, and the moments of quiet thought that revealed the man behind the name everyone feared. But she knew that if she truly wanted to help him, she had to understand the story behind the label. She had to know why the town called him Savage and why he had allowed that name to define him. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the town and the marketplace emptied of people, Eliza finally asked Daniel if he would tell her about his past. At first, he hesitated. His eyes dropped to the ground, and for a long moment he did not speak. He was not used to talking about the things that hurt him most. His life had been built on walls, on keeping people at a distance, and on making sure that no one could see the pain he carried. "I don't know if I can," he finally said quietly, his voice hoarse from years of silence. "You can," Eliza replied softly. "I'm here to listen, not to judge. I just want to know who you really are." Her words were gentle but firm, and something in them gave Daniel courage. Slowly, he began to speak. He told her about his childhood, about the boy he had been, joyful, curious, and full of dreams. He had loved to explore the fields near his home, climb trees, and spend time with his family. He remembered the smell of his mother's cooking and the laughter of his younger sister as they played games in the backyard. Those days had been simple, happy, and full of hope. Then he told her about the accident that changed everything. It was years ago, a single event that shattered his life. Someone he loved had been hurt, and although it was not his fault, the town had blamed him. Friends stopped speaking to him. Neighbors whispered behind his back. Teachers and employers looked at him with suspicion. Slowly, the boy who once laughed freely became a man who learned to survive through silence and caution. "That's when the name started," he said, his voice low. "They called me Savage at first as a joke. It was meant to scare me, maybe to keep me in line. But after a while, it stuck. People stopped seeing me as Daniel. They only saw Savage." Eliza listened, her heart heavy with the weight of his story. She could see the pain in his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed as he relived memories that had haunted him for years. But she also saw resilience, the quiet strength that had kept him alive and moving forward even when the world had turned against him. "People judged me," he continued. "They didn't ask questions, they didn't try to understand, they only assumed I was dangerous. And after a while, I stopped correcting them. I let them believe what they wanted. It was easier that way." Eliza nodded, understanding more than words could express. She had always believed that people were shaped by both their experiences and how others treated them. Daniel's story was proof of that. He had been shaped by loss, fear, and misunderstanding. But now, for the first time in years, someone had chosen to see him as a person, not as a problem. Over the next few days, their conversations became more frequent and deeper. Daniel shared stories of his teenage years, of the times he had tried to make friends, and of the moments when he had hoped things would get better. He told her about jobs he had lost unfairly, about neighbors who had spread rumors, and about the loneliness that had become a constant companion. Each story revealed a man who had endured more than most people could imagine, yet who had never completely given up. Eliza, in turn, encouraged him to remember the boy he once was. She reminded him that the qualities that had made him joyful, curious, and kind were still within him. "They are still part of you, Daniel," she said. "The world may have tried to bury them, but they are not gone. You can still choose to be the person you were meant to be." At first, Daniel found it difficult to believe her. It had been years since anyone had treated him with kindness without expectation. The world had taught him to expect fear, judgment, and rejection. But Eliza's unwavering belief was different. She did not look at him with pity. She did not see him as broken. She saw him as capable, as worthy, and as someone who could rise above the labels the town had placed upon him. Slowly, Daniel began to open up in ways he never had before. He began to speak with more confidence, to make decisions for himself, and to take small steps toward reintegrating into the town. He started helping neighbors with chores, offering to carry supplies for the marketplace, and even smiling at children who had once run away. Each act, no matter how small, was a step toward reclaiming his identity. The town, of course, noticed. Some people whispered doubts, wondering if Eliza's influence was temporary. "He can't change," they said. "Once a savage, always a savage." Others watched quietly, unsure what to make of the transformation, but slowly the walls of fear began to crack. People started to see the man behind the name. They noticed his patience, his willingness to help, and the calmness he exhibited in situations that might have angered him in the past. Eliza encouraged him every step of the way. She helped him see that trust could be rebuilt, that relationships could be repaired, and that the town could learn to see him differently if he gave them the chance. She also taught him that change was not about proving people wrong, but about proving to himself that he could be more than the labels the world had given him. One day, as they walked through the marketplace together, a child ran up to Daniel, holding a small wooden toy. "I made this for you," the child said shyly. Daniel looked down, surprised. He hadn't expected such a gesture. He accepted the toy with a small nod, his heart warming. It was a small act, but it meant something. The child had chosen to trust him, to see him as someone who could care and be kind. And in that moment, Daniel realized that the world could be different if people chose to believe in each other. Eliza's role in his life grew more significant with each passing day. She helped him navigate interactions with townspeople, encouraged him to speak up when he felt afraid, and reminded him of his worth when doubt crept in. Her belief in him never wavered, and slowly, Daniel began to believe in himself. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's reputation began to shift. The stories that had once painted him as dangerous began to change. People told tales of his kindness, his patience, and his willingness to help others. The nickname Savage was still whispered by some, but fewer and fewer people used it. Instead, they began to call him by his real name, Daniel, as if acknowledging that the man he truly was could not be contained by a single word. Daniel also began to confront parts of his past he had avoided for years. He visited places he had once feared, spoke to people he had once avoided, and faced memories that had haunted him. It was not easy. There were moments of doubt, anger, and fear. But with Eliza by his side, he found the courage to face them. She reminded him that strength was not about avoiding pain, but about moving forward despite it. Through this process, Daniel discovered something profound. He realized that the nickname Savage, while hurtful, had also taught him resilience. It had forced him to endure, to survive, and to find strength within himself. But now, with guidance and support, he could choose a new identity, one defined not by fear or judgment, but by courage, kindness, and trust. Eliza's unwavering belief in him became a guiding light. She taught him that people were capable of change if given understanding, patience, and encouragement. She showed him that the world was not entirely cruel, and that even in a town filled with fear and judgment, kindness could thrive. By the end of Part 3, Daniel was no longer just a man hiding from the world. He had begun to reclaim his life, rebuild his identity, and form connections that had been impossible before. The town, too, began to see him differently. Slowly, cautiously, they started to recognize the man behind the nickname, the person who had endured so much and emerged with courage and dignity. Life in the town had begun to feel different for Daniel. For the first time in years, he was not just the man everyone feared. He was a man with purpose, a man being seen as more than a rumor, more than a label. With Eliza by his side, he had started rebuilding trust, forming small connections with neighbors, and slowly regaining a sense of dignity he thought he had lost forever. Yet he knew deep down that the path ahead would not be easy. Change is never accepted overnight, and the town's memory of him as Savage was long and stubborn. One bright morning, Daniel walked through the marketplace carrying a crate of fresh vegetables to the local store. The sun sparkled across the rooftops and the town felt peaceful, almost normal. Children played nearby, laughing as they ran past him, and for a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to feel hope. People greeted him with cautious smiles, acknowledging his presence without the fear that had once filled the air. Even the baker waved at him, offering a nod of acknowledgement that made his chest swell quietly with pride. But peace, he had learned, was always fragile. That same afternoon, trouble arrived like a shadow that darkened the sunny day. A theft had occurred in the town. A valuable tool from a workshop had gone missing, and whispers spread quickly. People immediately looked for someone to blame. The atmosphere, once calm, became tense and charged with suspicion. Daniel felt it immediately. He could see the way neighbors glanced at him, the subtle shift in posture, the suspicion in their eyes. Some called out, "Did you see him?" "He's always around when trouble happens." Others whispered, "Call him savage, but he hasn't changed. He's dangerous." The words stung, though Daniel tried to ignore them. He had faced this countless times before, but now it felt different. This time he had to prove to himself and to others that he was not the man they assumed him to be. Eliza was with him when the accusations began. She saw the fear in the crowd and the doubt creeping into Daniel's eyes. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," she said softly, "you know who you are, stay calm, speak the truth. You don't need to prove anything to them, only to yourself." The crowd grew louder, impatient for answers. A few men stepped forward, ready to assert authority, their voices filled with judgment and expectation. They did not wait for facts, they assumed guilt. Daniel felt the familiar rush of tension in his chest. His old instincts urged him to react, to defend himself with force or silence, to retreat into the persona of Savage that had kept him safe for years. But he remembered Eliza's words. He remembered the trust she had placed in him and the hope she had offered. This was the moment to show that he was not defined by fear. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward. He addressed the crowd in a steady voice, calm but firm. "I did not take anything. I was not there when it happened. I cannot prove what I did not do, but I will cooperate. I will answer questions, and I will do whatever I can to help find the truth." A few people laughed, mocking his calmness. "You always talk like that, Savage," one said. "But everyone knows you can't be trusted." Others murmured, some nodding at the statement, others unsure what to believe. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and Daniel could feel the eyes of the town on him, watching, waiting for him to slip. Eliza stepped forward beside him. "Listen to him," she said firmly. "He has nothing to hide. He is cooperating fully. Do not judge him before knowing the truth." Her voice carried authority and confidence. For a moment the murmuring paused. People could sense her sincerity, and a few even felt the stirrings of doubt about their assumptions. The town's authorities arrived shortly after, ready to investigate the theft. They questioned Daniel carefully, noting his composed demeanor and willingness to answer every question truthfully. He did not grow defensive, nor did he become aggressive. He simply shared what he knew, what he had observed, and where he had been at the time of the theft. Hours passed, and the tension remained. Some townspeople muttered that the investigation would prove nothing. Others whispered encouragement, recalling Daniel's recent acts of kindness and his efforts to integrate into the town. Eliza stayed with him throughout, offering quiet support and reminding him to remain patient. Finally, after careful investigation, the truth came out. The theft had been committed by a newcomer to the town, someone who had hoped to hide their actions by shifting blame. Daniel had been innocent all along. When the authorities confirmed this, the atmosphere shifted once more. The anger and suspicion that had been directed at him slowly melted away. People began to realize that their assumptions had been wrong, and that Daniel's reputation as savage had unfairly overshadowed the truth. The relief was immense, but Daniel knew that trust could not be rebuilt with a single event. He understood that the town's perceptions would take time to change, and that skepticism would linger. Yet, the fact that he had remained calm, cooperative, and honest in the face of false accusations strengthened his sense of self. He realized that the man he had become was not defined by fear, judgment, or past mistakes, but by his choices in moments like these. Eliza smiled at him quietly, proud of his strength. "You faced it well," she said. "You proved something important not to them but to yourself. That is what matters." The crowd began to disperse slowly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others muttering apologies under their breath. Daniel noticed the subtle changes. Neighbors who had once avoided him now offered nods of acknowledgement. A child approached cautiously, holding out a small flower in a gesture of peace. Each act, no matter how small, was a step toward rebuilding the fragile trust between him and the town. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills surrounding the town, Daniel reflected on the day's events. He had faced suspicion, hostility, and the weight of old reputations, yet he had remained composed. He had chosen to respond with honesty and patience rather than anger or violence. And in doing so, he had begun to change not only the town's perception of him, but also his own perception of himself. Eliza sat beside him, quietly listening as he shared his thoughts. "You've come a long way," she said, "and there will be more tests, more challenges. But you are stronger than you think. You have shown that you can face fear without becoming it. That is something no one can take from you." Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that while the town had labeled him savage for years, it had been the trust, patience, and belief of one person that allowed him to begin reclaiming his life. Eliza had seen beyond the label, beyond the fear, and beyond the judgment. She had seen the man he truly was, and her belief had given him the courage to face the town and himself with honesty and integrity. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Daniel continued to work steadily, engage with neighbors, and help wherever he could. Each interaction, each act of kindness, and each moment of patience reinforced the new identity he was building. The town slowly began to see that Savage was no longer an accurate description of the man before them. Daniel was calm, responsible, and trustworthy. He had faced the test and he had passed, not because he sought approval, but because he chose to act with honesty and integrity. By the end of Part 4, Daniel had proven something important. A person is not defined by the labels others give them, nor by the mistakes of their past. Change is possible when someone chooses to face fear with courage, and when they are supported by belief, patience, and understanding. The nickname Savage may still linger in whispers, but it no longer has power over him. Daniel had faced his greatest test and emerged stronger, ready to continue rebuilding his life and relationships, step by step, day by day. Time passed, and life in the town began to settle into a new rhythm. The name Savage, once whispered in fear, slowly lost its power. People began to call Daniel by his real name. It was not immediate, and not everyone accepted it, but the shift was real. Daniel walked through the streets with his head held higher, not out of arrogance, but because he had earned his own sense of dignity. Each nod from a neighbor, each small act of acknowledgement, reminded him that he was more than the label the town had placed upon him. Children who had once run from him now waved with shy smiles. Shopkeepers greeted him with a newfound warmth. Even the police, who had long eyed him warily, nodded respectfully as he passed. The town was still cautious, but curiosity replaced fear. They had witnessed a man face suspicion, accusation, and misunderstanding with honesty, patience, and courage. Slowly, they began to see the truth that Eliza had recognized from the very beginning. Daniel was not a monster. He was a man capable of growth, trust, and kindness. Eliza remained by his side through it all, a quiet but unwavering presence. She did not seek attention or praise for what she had done. She had never expected anything in return. Her belief in him had been the spark that allowed him to see himself differently. She encouraged him to take small steps, to rebuild relationships, and to forgive both himself and the town for the past. "You've done more than most could," she said. "You've chosen to face fear with courage, and you've shown the world that people can change. That is a gift." Daniel had begun to understand the depth of her words. Change was not just about earning the town's trust, it was about reclaiming his own sense of self. He realized that for years, he had allowed the judgments of others to shape his identity. He had been defined by fear, rumors, and mistakes that were not even his own. But now, he could choose who he wanted to be. He could define himself by his actions, his choices, and his character, not by the misconceptions of the past. One morning, Daniel visited the marketplace, carrying a basket of fresh fruit to the bakery. The baker, who had once avoided him, smiled warmly and offered him a loaf of bread as a gift. "For you, Daniel," he said, using the name for the first time without hesitation. Daniel's chest swelled with quiet pride. He accepted the bread with a nod, understanding the significance of this small gesture. It was not about the bread itself, but about recognition, respect, and acceptance. As Daniel walked through the streets, he noticed more small signs of change. Children played near him without fear. Neighbors exchanged smiles and greetings. The town's perception of him had shifted, not completely, but enough to make a difference. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only toward those who had begun to see him differently, but also toward himself. He had endured years of isolation, misunderstanding, and judgment, yet he had faced it with courage and honesty. He had chosen to rise above fear and anger, and in doing so, he had transformed not only his life, but also the way others saw him. Eliza watched quietly as Daniel navigated the town with confidence. She had seen him face challenges, doubts, and accusations, and she had witnessed his growth firsthand. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also knew that Daniel had reached a point where he could continue on his own. He had learned to trust himself, to act with integrity, and to show kindness even in the face of fear. He had proven above all that a person is not defined by the labels others give them, nor by the mistakes they have endured. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills surrounding the town, Daniel and Eliza walked together to a small park on the edge of town. Children laughed in the distance, and the air was filled with the soft hum of life. Daniel paused, taking a deep breath, and looked at Eliza. "Thank you," he said quietly, "not just for believing in me, but for helping me see myself again. I didn't think I could ever feel this way whole." Eliza smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were always capable, Daniel," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you. Now it's your turn to remind yourself every day." In the following weeks, Daniel continued to rebuild his life. He found steady work, contributed to the community, and even helped organize events for the town. People who had once feared him now came to him for advice, recognizing his wisdom, patience, and strength. The nickname Savage faded further, replaced by the man he truly was, Daniel, someone who had endured, learned, and grown. The transformation was not just external. Daniel felt a profound change within himself. He no longer carried the constant weight of fear and suspicion. He could walk through the town without bracing for judgment. He could interact with neighbors without expecting hostility. And most importantly, he could see himself clearly without the shadow of Savage hanging over him. He had reclaimed his identity, his dignity, and his place in the world. The town, too, learned a powerful lesson. They realized that their assumptions had been wrong, that fear had clouded their judgment, and that one person's courage and belief could change not only an individual, but also an entire community. People began to approach Daniel with curiosity instead of fear, with kindness instead of suspicion. Slowly, the walls of judgment and rumor crumbled, replaced by understanding, empathy, and respect. One afternoon, as Daniel walked through the town square, he noticed a group of children building a small wooden fort. They looked up at him, smiled, and waved. For a moment he hesitated, remembering how he had once been seen as dangerous, someone to be avoided at all costs. Then he smiled back, nodding warmly. The innocence of their gesture reminded him that the world could be a place of hope and trust, even after years of pain. Eliza joined him, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. "Look at them," she said. "They don't know the stories, the rumors, or the fear. They just see you. That's how it should be." Daniel nodded. "It feels different," he said. "To be seen for who I really am, it's more than I ever imagined." In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued to grow into the man he was meant to be. He helped neighbors, supported friends, and acted with integrity in every situation. The town gradually shifted from fear to respect, from judgment to understanding. People learned that a person is not defined by the past, by mistakes, or by labels. They learned that courage, patience, and belief can transform not only an individual, but also the hearts of those around them. Eliza remained a quiet guide, never imposing, always supportive. She had shown Daniel the power of belief and the importance of seeing the good in others. But she had also allowed him the space to grow on his own, to make choices, and to reclaim his life without pressure or expectation. Together, they had created a path for change, one that was not about perfection, but about honesty, trust, and resilience. By the end of this journey, Daniel had fully reclaimed his identity. Savage was no longer a part of him. He was a man who had faced fear, accusation, and misunderstanding, and had emerged stronger. He had learned to trust himself, to act with integrity, and to show kindness even when it was difficult. He had learned that change is possible, even when it seems impossible, and that one person's belief can make all the difference in the world. The town had changed as well. They had learned to look beyond fear, to question assumptions, and to see people for who they truly are. They had witnessed a transformation that was not only remarkable but inspiring. And they had learned that sometimes the most powerful act is not punishment or judgment, but understanding, patience, and belief. As Daniel walked through the town one evening, the sun casting a warm glow over the streets, he felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. Children waved at him, neighbors greeted him warmly, and the air was filled with a sense of community and hope. He smiled, knowing that he had not only changed his own life, but had also helped others see the power of kindness and trust. He turned to Eliza, who walked beside him quietly. "I understand now," he said. "The world doesn't have to define me. I can define myself." Eliza smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Exactly," she said. "And now you can live your life fully as the man you were always meant to be." Daniel looked ahead at the town he had once feared, at the people who had once judged him, and at the life he had almost lost. And he knew with certainty that he was no longer just a survivor of the past. He was a man who had reclaimed his identity, his dignity, and his place in the world. He was Daniel, not Savage, a man worth believing in, a man worth saving.